Hi guys, crazy Putin got cornered like a rat and made a desperate speech yesterday telling that Russia is ready to use nukes to force Ukraine to capitulate. This guy is completely out of mind and his speech was an ugly mix of Hitler and Stalin ideas. I have listened to all of it and pick up the most bizarre highlights for you. The reason for the speech was a fake annexation of 4 Ukrainian regions after staged referendums. None of these regions are even fully controlled by Russia, which makes it super cringy and reminds me of Palestine, who claimed the whole territory of Israel belonging to them despite controlling 0 lands. Moreover, the Ukrainian forces encircled the city of Liman just a couple of hours before Putin's speech, and as of today, that strategically important city of Donetsk region is back under the Ukrainian control, which is another shameful loss for Russia. My guess, when Ukraine takes all its lands back, Putin will announce that all Ukraine is part of Russia to make a virtual revenge. How Putin explained these actions to Russian peasantry? None of these were planned just a week ago, but suddenly Putin announced a referendum for these regions to join Russia and surprise surprise, 99% of voters voted in favor. Half of the claimed land is under Ukrainian control, and surely none of these people voted in that scam, neither people who temporarily left these areas after the war. It's physically impossible to make a turnout of 50%. It's so cringy that even North Korea won't be able to recognize that. The only reason for that manipulation is to allow Russian conscripts to fight on that land without declaring an official war. Putin is a former KGB agent and he thinks of himself as a master of special operation, but not a master of wars. But there is a huge ideological problem for Russian peasantry. For 8 years, the propaganda was talking about genocide of Russian people in Donetsk and Luhansk. The other 2 regions were not even mentioned. The official goal of that so-called special operation was to liberate Donbas, not these 2 regions, and the propaganda was initially hiding the fact that Russia occupied Kherson and Zaporizhia regions. To be honest, most of the regular Russians have no clue where these regions are. There were 0 separatist movements and the city of Zaporizhia is 100% under the control of Ukraine. I know Russian peasantry is stupid and can believe in anything, but propaganda is clearly behind the events, and in wake of recent draft, more and more people starting to question what is really going on there. The mind-blowing fact is that in Putin's theater, it's not an annexation but a voluntary unification with Russia of independent republics. In terms of so-called Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic, it makes sense from propaganda perspective because they were officially recognized by Russia in February. Kherson and Zaporizhia have never announced their independence and have been under partial Russian occupation since the February. Nonetheless, the magician Putin had to sign a separate act of recognition of their independence 1 day before the annexation act. This way, it's not annexation of Ukrainian land, but an independent republic. It's probably the first case in history when a country was recognized as independent without making any announcement of that. Still, the desire to join Russia is not enough to be accepted. Propaganda must find a reason why these new regions should be accepted. For Donbas it's clear, but I was waiting for a reasoning of Putin's justification on Zaporizhia and Kherson. Here's what he said. In Kherson and Zaporizhia, authorities tried to make people hate Russia and everything Russian. Now the Kiev regime has threatened death to school teachers and women who worked at referendums, intimidated people who came to vote. So there was no genocide in there, no discrimination of Russian speakers. Everyone was pretty happy, but when Russia partially occupied these lands and declared illegal referendum, Ukrainian authorities got unhappy with collaborators and now Russia must protect them. Crazy Putin's logic. Then Putin in his speech begged Kiev authorities to stop the war and return to diplomacy, obviously pretending that it's Ukraine that started the war, not him. Adding that newly added regions won't be discussed from now because they are forever Russian, which looks like complete madness considering that Russia is losing in war badly. 500 people per day are being killed, more and more lands are being liberated, and Ukraine probably will take Kherson by the end of the year. But here Putin added that he will protect new lands by all available means, clearly suggesting nuclear weapons. It looks like a bluff to me, because neither nuclear threat nor the actual usage of tactical nuclear weapons would stop Ukraine from its struggle. But in Putin's mind, Ukraine is just a puppet state of the US and NATO, and this must convince them that it's not worth to deliver more weapons to Ukraine. And then Ukraine will capitulate by the will of its Western masters. He actually thinks like that. So the rest of his speech was specifically addressed to the evil West, not Russian people. Let me give you some direct quotes. The West was looking and still looking for a chance to punch us, weaken and dissolve Russia into parts, divide people of Russia and force them to poverty and extinction. They can't agree that there is a such great, huge country with all its territory and natural resources with people who can't and won't live by a foreign dictate. Well, it's quite the opposite. Putin was trying to divide the West by sponsoring alt-right parties and corrupting bunch of officials in Europe and US with oil and gas money. He tried to make a coup in Montenegro back in 2016. Speaking about poverty, I don't really know any European nation who still use outdoor toilets and have to go to wooden crap house to drop the bomb after a meal. Russia is an extremely poor country outside of Moscow and St. Petersburg. Nobody cares about natural resources. It's 21st century. The West is ready for everything to save its new colonial system, which allows it to parasitize and in fact to rob the world by the power of US dollar and technological dictatorship. What the heck is that? No matter how nonsense it is, many of the leftists in the West could actually agree with that conspiracy. Their real motive is to save that passive income. That's why they demand from everyone a loss of sovereignty. That's why they are so aggressive to independent countries, traditional values and native cultures, and attempt to destroy international and integration processes, new world currencies and technological hubs which they can't control. I feel like I'm listening to AOC. The guy compares Russians to native cultures of America. It's a clear attempt to get some credit from the left. For them, our thoughts and philosophy is a direct threat. That's why they're trying to kill our philosophers. He's obviously referring to Alexander Dugin, whose daughter was recently killed. Of course, the US has nothing to do than to kill a forgotten, half-literate occultist. Our culture and art is dangerous for them, that's why they ban it. Surely it has nothing to do with recent unprovoked war. The West is just afraid of traditional values promoted in Nabokov's Lolita. We hear from every corner, the West fights for order based on rules. Where did the rules come from? Who invented them? Who saw them and agreed? This is a complete bullshit and lies, double and triple standards. It's made for stupid. Russia is a great country of 1,000 years, country civilization. It won't live by rigged and faked rules. Well, the problem is that it's no longer the West, but also China and India who wants you to stop. No one will ever recognize any of your annexations or referendums. Even North Korea will soon switch sides. Let me remind the West that it started its colonial policy back in medieval times. Then there was a slave trade, genocide of natives in America, robbery of India and Africa, wars in England and France against China, which resulted in China opening its port for opium trade. They made nations drug addicts, intentionally killed whole ethnoses for lands and resources, made hunts on people like on animals. This is against the nature of human truth, freedom and justice. He really tries hard to convince China, India and Africa to join him, using the most woke leftist propaganda points. Very naive. By the way, Russia is the biggest colonizer because most of these huge lands were populated by various nations in the past. And Russia is responsible for genocide of Circassian people in 19th century and Stalin's Holocaust of its own nation. Russia robbed Baltic states during Soviet occupation and made many Muslim nations of Central Asia alcoholics. USA is the only country in the world which used nuclear weapons twice, destroying Japanese city of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. By the way, they set a precedent. This is a direct threat to Ukraine and readiness to do the same in the end. My understanding is that NATO made itself clear that it will join the war if Russia tries to use that. And the results will be horrible and catastrophic for Russia. China and India are not happy either because this might lead for more countries to acquire nuclear weapons after realizing that a non-nuclear power can be attacked by nuclear weapons without any consequences. Let's be clear, Putin's goal is to intimidate the West, not actually to nuke Ukraine or any other country. Neither he is seriously considering using strategic nuclear weapons and making a war of extinction. Rather, he is thinking about a small tactic weapons which can be used on battlefields to destroy some Ukrainian troops, which is very questionable in terms of efficiency, or he can explode the bomb in the sky to destroy most of the electric devices around. Putin seems to believe that the West won't respond much if he uses a small nuclear bomb. If that's true, he might use it at the very end of the game, but technically it's super hard to launch something like that. You have a huge chains of officers and people on the field who make it happen. And it's hard to be unnoticed in this process either. Plus, there is an anti-missile system which can destroy one of these. But again, the guy is crazy and lives in the world of illusions. He can do this at the very end. Let me remind you that the US, along with the UK, during the Second World War, fully destroyed Dresden, Hamburg and Cologne and other cities without any military necessity. The craziness of this kind of a statement is that Putin actually still believes that he can bring the divide between the US and Europe by reminding them of some dark past. In Putin's mind, historiography and nation pride alone can justify the war. He does not understand that Western democracies are not about that. Consumerism and happy lives are more important than pride of a dictator. De facto, they are still occupying Germany, Japan and Korea and other countries as well. At the same time, they cynically call them equal allies. All the world knows that the leaders of these countries are under wiretapping. This is disgrace, both of those who do it and those who silently accept that like slaves. Putin actually believes that what he is doing is exactly the same as the US is doing in the rest of the world. He's crazy old guy. Sanctions are not enough for Anglo-Saxons, so they started sabotage by organizing explosion at the Nord Stream pipeline at the bottom of Baltic Sea. They de facto started the destruction of the European energy infrastructure. It's so obvious who gets the benefit from that. They made it because it's beneficial for them. It's a big mystery who did and why these explosions occurred, and we don't officially know, but the evidence points to Russia. No one else is crazy enough to do that. There are a bunch of benefits for Russia as well. Now they don't have to pay fines for not providing gas according to the contracts. Previously they shut down the pipeline using the fake pretext of malfunctioning turbine. And Putin's crazy plan was to make Europe scared of not having gas in the future and push for a peace deal with Ukraine, which didn't work that well because all the gas storages in Europe are full and the continent can survive the upcoming winter. The last reason of that self-destructing behavior is that Putin has a plan of transforming Russia into a North Korea, making it super poor with a slave-like agrarian population. In this case, Russia can lose the war, but Putin and the surrounding can still keep the power. The borders are open, and Putin explicitly tells us that there will be no prosperity for the next 30 years, so leave now if you're smart. You can't feed people with printed dollars and euros. You can't feed them with paper, nor you can heat their houses with inflated capitalization of the Western social media corporations. You need industries and energy. Russia is actually really bad in industries and agriculture, and it imports way more stuff than Europe. So it's completely delusional. And Europe finally has a chance to turn into nuclear power and forget about Russian gas forever. At the same time, without gas money, it will be really hard to continue that war, especially considering the recent draft and upcoming economical crisis which undeniably will come. At the very end, Putin reminded us about woke ideology. Let's answer the simplest question. I want to talk to all citizens of Russia. Would you be okay if in our country, instead of mother and father, we would use parent number 1, number 2, number 3? Do we want the propaganda of sexual deviations which leads to degradation and extinctions in our primary schools? That kids will be taught that there are also so-called genders in addition to men and women and offer them gender reassignment surgery. This is not acceptable to us. Basically, the idea is that America wants to invade Russia by Ukrainian hands with the goal to spread transgenderism to holy Russian lands, and that's why Russian people must be ready to die on the battlefield. To summarize, this is a very desperate move which does not help fading Putin's support among the peasantry, who are really confused why they should die for this new lands. Same stands for hardline Russian imperialists who are very concerned that Russia lost badly around Liman and the commandment basically did nothing but celebrate fake annexation in Moscow. The partial conscription in Russia is not doing well either. I was wrong assuming that they would actually try to hire professionals, not just a cannon fodder. But the only purpose of the Russian army is to extract money using corrupt schemes. Basically, the conscript was organized locally, and crazy military guys were taking random people, hoping to get some bribes from them to be left alone. Even all the Russian propagandists were publicly condemning these actions, basically going against the system by exposing unjust cases, which is a clear proof that conscription went out of control. From the other side, the border is still open despite the rumors, and everyone who wants to leave can leave. Some non-Russian speaking regions like Chechnya and Dagestan started to protest against conscription. Since Moscow's control there is much weaker, the local leaders managed to convince Putin to leave them alone, which raises a question about whether they are still part of Russia. But surprisingly, there are many people in the rest of the country who are happy to become conscripts and go to the war, which solves the main objective. Finally, Ukraine officially asked to join NATO, which is a very symbolic move at this point, but the chances of this becoming a reality is much higher than Russia can keep even the Crimea at the end of the war. I think October will definitely be a very violent month, so I will keep you updated. Thanks for watching, don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you next time. Bye!